Hey, what are you doing here still? You you want to learn more about World War II? You weren't done with the last 15 videos we had to watch? You you want to know what happened at home in the United States during the war? Well, sure, we can definitely do that. I'd love to talk about that with you. So today we'll do just that. We'll talk all about what's going on in America during World War II, our response to the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, and how we kind of lock people away into camps, or how we mobilized for war and rationed off our items and made sure we didn't let people have certain things so that we could be able to mobilize for war quickly. So today, we'll do just that. We'll talk all about World War II at home, the home front. So one of the first things that happens when the war breaks out is rationing, and that's basically limiting access to essential items for people who aren't part of the military. And the idea behind this is that the Office of Price Administration is going to limit what you can and can't use, like rubber, meat, sugar, coffee, canned foods, fuel, nylons to make stockings for women, shoes. All of those were rationed so that people weren't using too much of them, so that the government then had enough to be able to use those items towards the war effort. You would get what was known as a ration book, or a little coupon book that you could tear off and use to get as many to get the items that you needed for basic essential survival, but not for just frivolous buying and selling of the items that you wanted. The idea behind this is that we all kind of give up certain creature comforts to the war effort. Also, you get the War Production Board, and this is an organization who oversees the transition of a wartime economy. The idea is that instead of making consumer goods like radios and cars and T-shirts and things like that, companies are going to switch to making tools for war, basically. Anheuser-Busch famously shut down production of beer and bottled water for a while. And, you get these ideas of Rosie the Riveter, because as men leave and go off to fight in the war, who's left behind? Well, it's older citizens and young kids, but also women. Women began to move into the workforce really for the first time, and you get what's known as Rosie the Riveter. That's the pictures all kind of down right here and right there, as you can kind of see. Yeah, there we go. I got them. Of women who move into the workforce and start to take over those jobs that were traditionally held by men in these factory positions. They'll do these throughout the duration of the war, and many women after the war will not quit these jobs and will stay in them and kind of become more self-sufficient and independent as the years go on. You also have propaganda, which becomes a big industry at this time. And the idea is that you want to convince people to keep rationing, to keep their mouths shut if they're working on top secret projects, or to just generally keep morale up about the war. Propaganda is used to promote conservation. Buying war bonds. You buy these war bonds. That means you give the government money, and then in a few years you'd cash your bond in, and you'd make money back on the interest that had been paid over the years. Any message that was kept to keep the focus on the war was used. We've looked at some of the stuff in class already about what Disney was doing. We'll look much more about that. We'll also look at what Dr. Seuss was doing at the same time. And we'll look at some other American propaganda that's going on at this time. You also get a greater increase of African American involvement in the armed services. While units are still largely segregated and they continue to face discrimination at home, African Americans begin to join the military in greater numbers in hopes to get away from some of the problems that are at home, but also to show that they are just as capable as anyone else of fighting and dying for their country and freeing what people overseas. One of the more shameful periods of our history is our response towards Japanese Americans when the war breaks out. Remember, it's Japan that attacks Pearl Harbor, and as a result, many people, out of fear and bigotry and hatred, begin to show racism and prejudiceness towards Japanese Americans. Now, these are not people who necessarily are even born in Japan. Many of them are American citizens who had lived their entire lives here, but had Japanese ancestry. And they are largely discriminated against because of it. And if you see some of the pictures right over there, right, it says Japs keep moving. This is a white man's neighborhood. Japanese Americans, a short name, a derogatory term would be Japs, so that's something we don't typically use. It also says, there's another sign there that says we don't want any Japs back here ever. There's a lot of hatred and bigotry that arises because of that. You also get Executive Order 9066, which we'll look at much more closely in class, but it's issued by FDR, this guy right here, in 1942, and it creates military camps in the West, like Manzarna, I think is how you say it. And basically the idea is Japanese Americans are going to be rounded up and relocated into these camps for the duration of the war. Now, their argument was, we're doing this to protect you and to protect the homeland because we're not sure if you might be enemy combatants or if you might have sympathies toward Japan. Quite frankly, it's just a shameful period in our history. It's something where we're locking up American citizens into camps and segregating them from the rest of society for the duration of the war for no other purpose than being Asian American and being Japanese American. We're not exterminating them like Adolf Hitler and the Nazis are doing, but it's not far away from segregating and being prejudiced towards people basically based on the color of their skin and their ancestral heritage. As you can see, here's pictures of people who are being rounded up and sent on these camps. Many of these people were especially school children who were, patriotic Americans who had grown up here all their life, who just simply had Japanese ancestry. Here's a picture of the camps and another of young men who'd been put in these camps. They're behind barbed wire. They're like prison camps, for lack of a better term. All Japanese Americans on the West Coast were put into internment camps, and most were American citizens. They had been born and raised here in America. 120,000 people were imprisoned until 1945. You also have what was known as the Zoot Suit riots that happened in Los Angeles in 1942. Among some of the rationed goods were wool, and it was rationed during the war, and War Production Board banned what was known as zoot suits or wool baggy suits that were popular amongst Latino men, particularly young men. They as you see here in the picture below, right, I'm off on my distance things here today. There, right there. Yes, that man is being inspected because he has a zoot suit on. They're these oversized baggy suits that are made of wool. Clashes between stationed servicemen and Latinos begin to explode throughout LA and San Diego and many other West Coast cities. And you see here, there's American servicemen with clubs out attacking these young men for wearing zoot suits because they're openly defying the American government because they basically feel like they're being selected and picked on because they're Latino, not because like they're just wearing these suits. You see here, many men are rounded up and are arrested and sent to jail. And this is a big deal. I mean, this is one of the first times that you're seeing a protest against the American government during wartime. You can argue the merits of whether or not these men should have been protesting, but they were doing their civic duty and using their civic rights and their constitutional rights by protesting during the war, something that they thought was unfair and that was singling them out and targeting them specifically. That's kind of what's going on at home. You have Rosie the Riveter and women who are moving into the workplace for the first time. You have rationing and the self-sacrifice that's going on in the country. And you have the shameful period of Japanese internment. We'll talk about all of this much more in depth tomorrow, but make sure you have these in your notes, as well as any questions you might have. Until then, have a great rest of your day. And guess what? Give yourself 2 big thumbs up. This is the last of the videos of World War II you have to do. We'll start the civil rights movement after this. Have a great rest of your day. Until tomorrow, bye everybody.